There is a strange unease that settles in the room when all sound dies. It is not merely the absence of noise, but the presence of something else, something ancient, spectral, and intolerably close. One feels it pressing upon the ears, upon the very soul, as though the walls themselves had begun to breathe. Most men cannot endure that moment. They reach, almost reflexively, for some small mechanism of distraction, the turning of a dial, the hum of a machine, the faint whisper of another's voice, anything, so long as the silence is exiled. Yet what they truly exile is not soundlessness itself, but the encounter that silence summons the confrontation with their own existence. For there is nothing so dreadful to the modern mind as to be left alone with itself. In the absence of noise, one begins to hear the subtle machinery of being, the faint ticking of thoughts, the pulse of anxiety, the low, incessant murmur of the will, that blind striving which, like an animal gnawing at its own chain, demands to move, to feed, to pursue. The stillness becomes unbearable, not because it is empty, but because it is full of the self one spends a lifetime avoiding. Listen carefully, and you will perceive that all this modern world, its ceaseless churning of sound and spectacle, is but a vast orchestra playing against that inner hum. The city never sleeps, not because it must work, but because it must not think. The endless rhythm of motion, cars, lights, music, speech, is the heartbeat of a species afraid to hear its own silence. What we call progress is but a louder form of despair. I have often thought that if every machine were stilled for but an hour, humanity would lose its mind. The collective silence would act as a mirror, held without mercy before the soul. We would see the futility of all our running, the absurdity of our endless pursuits, and we would collapse beneath the weight of our own consciousness. For that is the truth most men cannot bear, that life, stripped of distraction, reveals itself as an unending oscillation between desire and boredom. In desire we are tormented. In its absence, we are left to rot in meaninglessness. Noise is the bridge between these two torments, the drug that keeps the patient from realizing the hopelessness of his condition. Consider how quickly a man seeks company when solitude approaches. He does not seek love nor truth, but simply the muffled assurance that he exists. The voice of another rescues him from the void, a proof, however brief, that he is not alone in the labyrinth of being. Yet, when conversation ends and he returns to his chamber, the old unease returns, stronger than before. He lights a candle, then another. He opens a book, then closes it again. He listens to the night and feels, behind every creak and whisper, the silent gaze of eternity. And so he flees again into letters, into talk, into work, into anything that produces a sound to drown the abyss. Even art, that noblest of pursuits, has become a servant of noise. Where once it sought to reveal the stillness beneath appearances, it now competes in the carnival of distraction. Music, which was once the expression of the world's tragic rhythm, has been reduced to a narcotic for the restless. Every melody now demands to be followed by another, louder, faster, until the listener no longer listens at all. He merely consumes vibration to delay thought. The tragedy is not that man has become noisy, but that he believes noise is life. He imagines that to be silent is to be dead, and thus he fills every moment with artificial pulse. Yet in so doing, he kills the only part of himself capable of truly living the contemplative self, which breathes not in sound, but in still awareness. It is in silence that one perceives the truth of Schopenhauer's cruel insight, that existence is not a gift, but a compulsion. The will to live, blind and insatiable, drives every creature forward, not toward joy, but merely away from pain. Every pleasure is a momentary escape, every desire a chain renewed. And so long as this will stirs within us, silence becomes unbearable, for in silence its futility is revealed. When the noise stops, one senses the cage. Every ambition, every passion, every heartbeat is part of the same cosmic mechanism, the will striving against itself. One desires endlessly, suffers endlessly, and in the brief intervals of satisfaction, feels the dull weight of existence pressing once more. That weight is the silence beneath all sound, the eternal background against which all motion trembles. And because man cannot endure this awareness, he invents the modern world as an elaborate distraction from it. I have seen men who would rather endure calamity than calm. Their souls grow frantic in stillness, as though peace itself were a form of death. They mistake noise for vitality, chaos for purpose, stimulation for meaning. But if one watches closely, one sees that all their activity is but a desperate gesture, a refusal to see that nothing they pursue can silence the ancient murmur of the will. The philosophers of old sought liberation through contemplation, believing that by seeing clearly one could transcend the will. But the modern man no longer seeks liberation, he seeks oblivion. He does not wish to see the truth, only to forget it. And for this forgetting, he builds empires of sound. His world hums like a great machine, because his heart cannot bear to stop. I sometimes wonder if silence has become the last taboo. There was a time when to speak unnecessarily was vulgar. Now, to be silent is suspicious. A quiet man is treated as either mad or proud, because he does not join in the general performance of noise. Yet, what is this fear but a confession? It is the soul's admission that it no longer trusts itself in solitude. It fears what it might hear, not voices, not ghosts, but the echo of its own consciousness, stripped of disguise. There is no greater mirror than silence. In its presence, every pretense falls away. The self, deprived of external distraction, must confront its true nature, restless, needy, incomplete. One begins to sense that all one's striving, all one's passions, are but attempts to flee this incompleteness. We do not live to fulfill ourselves, we live to escape ourselves. Perhaps that is why every civilization, no matter how advanced, surrounds itself with sound. The drums of the primitive tribes, the hymns of the churches, the engines of industry, all serve the same purpose, to fill the void that consciousness reveals. It is not progress, but continuity. Man remains what he has always been, an animal terrified by the silence of his own awareness. And yet, paradoxically, it is only within that silence that truth resides. For sound belongs to the realm of appearances, of motion and change. Silence belongs to the realm of essence. To enter it is to stand outside time, to feel existence not as story but as state. It is a terrible clarity, for it shows life not as drama but as repetition, an endless returning of the same hunger, the same fear, the same will. But within that terror lies also the possibility of release. Not happiness, for that is illusion, but release the weary soul's recognition that to cease striving is the only form of peace left to it. Yet this peace cannot be forced. It is not achieved by discipline or by philosophy, but by exhaustion, when the will, having strained itself to the limit, collapses into stillness. Then, at last, silence ceases to be an enemy and becomes the only honest companion. But few reach this point willingly. Most must be dragged into it by despair, illness, or death. For as long as the body obeys, the mind invents its noise, its busyness, its goals, its passions. Even the search for truth can become such noise, if it is pursued not for understanding but for escape. The will disguises itself, even in our noblest pursuits. It is in this sense that the fear of silence is not trivial. It is the measure of our distance from truth. A man who cannot sit alone in a quiet room without distraction has not yet begun to live consciously. He remains a slave to the will, a leaf in the wind of desire. To him, every pause is death, and so he fills his life with motion. But the wise man, though he too feels the sting of the void, learns to face it without trembling. He sits with silence as one sits with an old friend, stern, unyielding, but familiar. Perhaps this is why the ancients revered the ascetic, not because he renounced pleasure, but because he endured silence. He walked away from the carnival of the world and into the desert of being, where nothing remains but the naked self. There, stripped of distraction, he discovers the true nature of existence, its monotony, its futility, its strange beauty. For even futility, when seen without illusion, acquires a certain calm. The modern man will never know this calm. His temples glow with light, his nights throb with music, his thoughts are consumed by the artificial pulse of devices and desires. He calls this progress, yet it is merely the perfection of distraction. He he has conquered the silence of the natural world, but not the silence within himself, and so he suffers endlessly, though he does not know why. Silence, once it enters the soul, becomes a mirror that will not turn away. It shows the will in its naked form, stripped of the illusions with which we clothe it. In that mirror, one sees not a hero, but a captive, a creature chained to a wheel that turns without purpose. Every desire appears noble while it burns within us, but once fulfilled, it reveals its true nature. It was only the wish to stop hurting. The will does not create joy. It suspends pain for a moment, then demands again. Thus, life is not the pursuit of happiness, but the management of torment. And because this truth cannot be endured in full daylight, men surround themselves with the fog of sound. In silence, this fog lifts. One sees the will as a beast without eyes, moving through the corridors of existence by scent and impulse alone. It is blind, yet cunning, always imagining that the next object, the next achievement, the next affection will finally quiet it. But there is no final object. The moment it grasps one, another rises, and the chase begins anew. That is why stillness terrifies us, for it interrupts the chase and forces the will to recognize its futility. When there is nothing to pursue, it turns inward and feeds upon itself. Observe a man at rest. His body may recline, but his mind runs like a hound in a closed room. He remembers, imagines, regrets, plans anything to keep the wheel spinning. Even his dreams are noisy, a theater for the will's ceaseless masquerade. He cannot rest, because rest is the shadow of death, and death is the only silence that will not break. He senses, however dimly, that the calm he seeks is inseparable from annihilation. Thus he flees both peace and the thought of peace. The ancients spoke of the soul, I speak rather of the mechanism. For what they called the soul is nothing but the will aware of itself, chained to intellect. The intellect is its lantern, not its master. It illuminates desire. It does not extinguish it. Indeed, the brighter the intellect, the more clearly it perceives the futility of the will's striving, and the deeper its melancholy. Hence, why the most intelligent are often the most miserable. They see through the play, yet remain bound to act in it. Noise offers temporary amnesia. The world obligingly supplies it in endless forms. The streets murmur, the gossip of neighbors, the hollow thunder of industry. The will drinks these sounds as an opiate. Each vibration says, "You are alive, you are moving, do not think." But once the noise stops, the withdrawal begins. The silence after a concert, the pause after laughter, the fading of a lover's voice all reveal the same wound. That existence, when unadorned, is intolerable. Consider how society praises busyness. To be constantly occupied is regarded as virtue, idleness as sin. But this moral judgment conceals a metaphysical cowardice. What we call industriousness is often only fear of thought. The workshop, the office, the market, these are temples where man worships motion. He offers his hours as sacrifices to escape the torment of awareness. He believes he is building the world, but he is merely running from the silence between two heartbeats. There is a certain honesty in suffering when it can no longer be denied. Pain, at least, silences distraction. In the extremity of agony or despair, one ceases to seek noise. The world contracts to a single sensation, I am. That is why suffering, though cruel, is the nearest thing to truth we know. It strips the intellect of ornament and leaves only the raw pulse of being. In that pulse, the will reveals itself without disguise. Every cry, every gasp, every silent endurance is its signature. To contemplate this is to see that life is a theater built on pain's foundation. Yet even this recognition tempts us to another illusion, the hope of escape through understanding. We imagine that to know the nature of suffering is to master it. But knowledge does not dissolve the will. It merely illuminates its labyrinth. One may see every turn and still be lost. The intellect is the prisoner's lamp, not the key to his cell. The more clearly one sees the walls, the higher they appear. In my own solitude, I have often watched this process with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining his own disease. I observe the will at work in myself, how it awakens each morning with the first consciousness of breath, immediately reaching for an object, a thought, a task, a memory, anything to feed upon. If none presents itself, it invents one. Thus I realize that I do not possess the will, it possesses me. I am merely its instrument, briefly self-aware. From this perspective, the endless noise of the world appears as the natural extension of the will's restlessness. Each human voice is the cry of a caged creature. Together, they form the roar of civilization. We call it progress, commerce, culture names that dignify our panic. Beneath every invention hums the same desperation to escape ourselves. Even our pursuit of connection through words and music is an elaborate effort not to be silent in each other's presence. But the will cannot be silenced by multiplication. 1,000 voices do not still the hunger of one heart. Indeed, the more we speak, the less we hear. The crowd is a louder solitude. In its noise, we forget our individuality, which is a temporary relief. But when the crowd disperses, the self returns like a ghost from the fog. Then the silence feels heavier than before, for it carries the echo of vanished voices. To confront this directly is the beginning of wisdom. It is not a cheerful wisdom. It brings no promises of happiness. It is the grim clarity that comes when one ceases to expect deliverance. One sees that life oscillates between the suffering of want and the suffering of satiety, and that noise is merely the lubricant of this pendulum. The will swings, the world hums, and in brief intervals of silence, we glimpse the futility of both. The great task, if task there be, is to endure these glimpses without fleeing. For in enduring them lies the only form of freedom available to the conscious being. Freedom not from the will that is impossible while life lasts, but from the delusion that noise can save us. When the mind ceases to seek distraction, when it looks into silence and does not recoil, a strange serenity arises. It is not joy, but a kind of lucid fatigue, the rest that follows surrender. This surrender is misunderstood by the noisy world. It calls it pessimism, even nihilism. Yet it is neither. It is simply the refusal to lie. To admit that the will is a tormentor is not to advocate despair. It is to end the masquerade of hope. For hope, too, is noise a future projected to muffle the present. Once it fades, the present stands naked, and in that nakedness there is a harsh beauty, like the beauty of winter when the leaves have fallen and only the structure of the tree remains. Man's tragedy is that he cannot remain long in this state. The will revives, the cycle resumes. But for those brief moments when the noise has ceased and the truth stands bare, one feels closer to the essence of things than in any ecstasy. It is as if the veil of appearances had lifted, revealing not a paradise but a wasteland, yet a wasteland illuminated by perfect understanding. The silence that terrified now becomes sacred. I suspect this is what the mystics dimly perceived when they spoke of emptiness and release. They sought to describe with symbols what the philosopher can only state in negation, that peace begins where the will falters. But while they turned this insight into religion, I must leave it as observation. There is no redemption in knowledge, only recognition. And recognition, though it frees the mind, leaves the heart heavy with the knowledge that it must continue beating. Thus I return to the world of sound, knowing it for what it is, the lullaby of the condemned. I hear in every note, every murmur of the crowd, the same plea, do not let me remember. And I, though conscious of the illusion, am not immune to it. I, too, seek sometimes the music that hides thought, the friendly voice that shields the void. For philosophy does not cure the wound, it only names it. Silence remains the physician and the executioner alike. When at last the night deepens and all devices are stilled, I sit once more before the patient mirror. The air itself seems to hold its breath. Then, faintly, from within, the old whisper begins again, the will murmuring its endless command. Be, strive, suffer. And I, weary but obedient to existence, listen until the first sound of morning breaks the spell, and the world's machinery resumes its merciful lie. The civilization of man is nothing but the externalization of his inner restlessness. What he cannot silence within, he multiplies without. The noise that fills his cities, his markets, his temples, is not the byproduct of progress. It is progress. It is the will translated into architecture, machinery, and language. The hum of the world is the hymn of our servitude. In every age, man has found new ways to drown himself. Where once he filled the night with drums and prayers, He now fills it with engines and endless talk. The vocabulary changes, but the motive remains: to escape the unspeakable loneliness of being. One need only walk through a modern city to perceive the madness disguised as vitality. Every window radiates light, every device hums, every mouth opens to speak. Each man imagines himself communicating, but in truth he merely contributes to a vast choir of mutual distraction. No one listens, everyone transmits. The air itself seems heavy with unreceived words, as though language, deprived of silence, had become a disease of the atmosphere. It is no longer a means to truth, but a means to avoid it. For truth is born of stillness, and we have murdered stillness with perpetual noise. Look at the faces that pass in the street. They are animated, but not alive. Their expressions flicker with the nervous electricity of constant stimulation. Each is plugged into the world's machinery, fed by it, drained by it. They call this connection, but it is dependency, the umbilical cord of the digital womb. To be disconnected, even for a moment, is to face withdrawal. They clutch their devices not out of interest, but out of fear, the fear of falling back into themselves. The tragedy is not merely technological, it is spiritual. The invention of machines that speak, sing, and mimic human presence did not create our emptiness, it revealed it. The mind that demands constant input is already impoverished. The device is only its mirror. We do not use our machines, we confess to them. We pour into them the noise we can no longer bear within, and they return it to us in 1,000 flattering forms. Thus we have created not a culture, but an echo chamber, where every sound is our own fear reverberating against the walls of time. Even art, which once served as the still eye of the storm, has surrendered to this mania for sound. The painter no longer contemplates, he advertises. The composer no longer listens to silence, he fills it. The poet, once a priest of quiet observation, now shouts into the void for applause. We mistake volume for depth, novelty for meaning, and stimulation for experience. The audience demands not reflection, but distraction. And so art, that ancient refuge of the soul, has been converted into another corridor of noise, a decorative mask over the same abyss. Our age worships attention as the supreme good. Yet, attention itself has become scattered beyond recognition. To capture it, one must shout louder than the rest. The world has become a marketplace where even truth must be sold by advertisement. The philosopher competes with the clown, and the clown wins, because laughter is louder than thought. This is the moral economy of noise. The more one distracts, the more one is adored. Silence, which once commanded reverence, now provokes suspicion. A man who speaks softly is assumed to have nothing to say. I have sometimes wondered whether the devil of our age might not be a sound engineer. He would not tempt with sin, but with signal. He would fill every frequency with content, so that no mind could ever reach the frequency of contemplation, and men, believing themselves entertained, would forget that they were enslaved. For slavery does not always wear chains, sometimes it wears headphones. Consider also the social realm, that theater of personality, where each actor plays himself to exhaustion. The noise here is not acoustic, but psychological. Every opinion, every declaration, every performance is a flare fired into the dark to announce, I am still here. We are terrified, not of being wrong, but of being unheard. Silence in this theater equals non-existence. The audience applauds not what is true, but what is loud. Thus sincerity perishes, and with it dignity. There was a time when conversation was an art, a measured exchange between minds seeking understanding. Now it is a duel of egos, competing for the last word. The aim is not truth, but victory. Each man listens only long enough to reload. The result is an infernal harmony of overlapping monologues, a sea of words without a single moment of listening. This is the democracy of noise. Everyone speaks, no one hears. Religion, which once offered sanctuary from the world's clamor, has itself joined the chorus. The sacred has been amplified. The sermon is broadcast. The prayer is performed. The mystery is explained. We have made even God noisy, as if the divine could not exist without our advertisement. The monks who once kept silent in their cells would be regarded today as defective believers, unproductive, antisocial, unprofitable. Yet, it was in their stillness that humanity preserved its last intuition of transcendence. Our culture's horror of quiet is therefore not accidental, it is structural. It is built into every institution that governs us. Schools teach children to speak, but not to think. Businesses train men to communicate, but not to understand. Governments manipulate opinion through the same endless repetition that fills the airwaves. Noise is not a symptom, it is the system itself. It ensures that no mind, however curious, can remain still long enough to question the design. The citizen who never pauses to listen will obey every rhythm that is imposed upon him. If you wish to measure a society's spiritual poverty, listen to its sound. The louder the city, the emptier the soul. The ancient villages, where one could hear the wind between the houses, knew more of being than our metropolises of perpetual hum. In those quieter times, death was not hidden. One could hear it in the tolling of the bell, in the fading of the day. Now we live as if deaf to mortality, drowning its whisper beneath synthetic joy. But the silence of death will claim us nonetheless, and it will be the first silence many have ever known. Even in the realm of thought, noise has triumphed. Philosophy itself, once the discipline of inward listening, has become a spectacle of jargon. Each school clamors for attention, erecting systems as grand as cathedrals but as hollow. The ancient pursuit of wisdom has been replaced by the commerce of ideas. The true philosopher, who speaks rarely and reluctantly, is drowned by the multitude of those who speak endlessly without thinking. We have democratized thought and killed it with applause. Yet I do not despise mankind for this. I pity it. For I know that beneath the din lies not malice, but terror, the same terror that stirs in me when the lamp burns low and I hear the slow ticking of the clock. It is the terror of non-being, the ancient cry of the will that senses its own mortality. The world's noise is its prayer against extinction. Every machine, every voice, every broadcast is an affirmation shouted into the void. I exist, I exist, I exist. But the void does not answer, and so we shout louder. Perhaps this is why the few who seek silence are treated with unease. The hermit, the recluse, the thinker, these figures disturb the order because they have ceased to shout. They stand as living accusations against the world's delirium. Their very quietness exposes the hysteria of the crowd. The noisy suspect them of sadness, of weakness, of madness. Yet it is precisely their refusal to participate in noise that preserves their sanity. For to live constantly, surrounded by sound, is to live in permanent evasion of oneself. When I reflect on this civilization of noise, I do not dream of its destruction that would merely replace one clamor with another. Rather, I imagine a single moment of collective silence. Picture an entire city suddenly pausing. No engines, no voices, no machines. The air would tremble with absence. Men would hear their own breathing, their own hearts, perhaps even their own thoughts. For an instant, they would feel what they have forgotten, that they exist not because of motion, but despite it. Then the fear would return, and they would rush again to fill the air. But that instant would have been truth. It is said that history is written by the victors. I would add that it is shouted by them. The quiet sufferer leaves no record. His truth dies with him. And yet it is he who has seen most clearly what life is. The progress of civilization is the progress of forgetting him, the systematic erasure of the contemplative soul. We have built monuments to heroes, but none to listeners. We celebrate conquest, not comprehension. Still, there remain, here and there, those who refuse the carnival. They live quietly at the margins, reading by candlelight, walking at dawn, listening to the faint music of the world before it wakes. To them, silence is not void, but presence, the presence of what cannot be spoken. They know that truth, like a shy animal, reveals itself only when the forest grows still. Perhaps the survival of the human spirit depends on these few, who keep the lamp of quiet burning while the rest of the world screams.